Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Hey everyone, this week we're continuing to bring you The Take's Year in Review. We're closing out our review of 2025 with today's episode. Is ICE operating as secret police in the United States? This episode first aired on November 19th, 2025. All dates and references are from that time. Here's the show. Let us know what you think in the comments.
Today, are U.S. federal immigration agents operating as secret police?
This is not law enforcement. This is becoming an American Gestapo.
Agents routinely conduct violent arrests without identifying themselves. Lawmakers and even the FBI say it needs to stop. So why is it happening anyway? I'm Natasha Del Toro, and this is The Take. Before we continue with today's show, don't forget to leave us a comment and let us know what you think about this episode and what kinds of stories that you'd like to see us do next time. And if you're listening on the podcast app, let us know where you're listening from and leave us a 5-star review while you're there. It helps people find the show.
I'm Hannah Allam. I'm a reporter at ProPublica. I'm based out of the Washington, D.C. bureau, and I cover national security with a focus on counterterrorism and immigration in the counterterrorism world.
Welcome to The Take. Just really excited to have you here. It feels like every single day now, there's a new disturbing video of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, conducting violent arrests of suspected undocumented immigrants.
Violent confrontation caught on video involving masked federal agents in Santa Ana.
And witnesses say a man was beaten with a baton and pepper sprayed in broad daylight yesterday.
Custody, you can see agents violently forcing one of the men to the ground, while one of the officers repeatedly strikes that man with a baton.
This is a trend that I started following earlier this year when I was working on a documentary for the program Al Jazeera Fault Lines about ICE and Trump's immigration crackdown. But what stood out to me from the people that we talked to and now from other communities that are being targeted is that many of these people don't even know who is arresting them or why they're being arrested. What exactly is going on here?
That's exactly what we sort of set out to find out because, like everyone else, we had seen this series of dramatic videos come out of these immigration raids, people being yanked off the street by masked agents, bundled into vans with no plates, taken to who knows where, as bystanders are just stand around saying, what just happened? And so my colleague, Dave McSwain, and I wanted to take a step back from the drama of those videos and kind of ask, how did we get here? What happened to transform ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, into this kind of force that we're seeing in these videos? And to do that, we called a lot of policing experts. We called experts on authoritarianism. And we said, what are we seeing here? And they said, we're really seeing the advent of a new kind of policing. This is a new frontier in law enforcement where this kind of protocol is now allowed, and it reverses a long history of moves toward greater accountability and greater transparency.
This seems like something new that's happening, which is what your piece explores, you and David McSwain's piece explores. And it starts with the story of a raid in California. What happened?
We started the piece with this raid out of Santa Ana, and my colleague Dave had obtained the 911 calls that were coming in to the local authorities when federal agents swept into town on one of these immigration raids. It was over the summer, I think in June, and people were seeing these scenes play out in front of them, people being bundled off right in front of them, and you can kind of hear the confusion, the fear in these 911 tapes. People are saying things like, what kind of police go around with no tags? Hey, I just saw a guy getting bundled into the back of a van and it doesn't say ICE. And I remember this one man said, do we just run from them? just people calling 911 to ask, what do we do? Because like you said, they hadn't seen this kind of force in this kind of conduct on the streets before, with people, sort of being bundled into cars and driven off in the middle of the day. So this was very frightening. Some local officials in Santa Ana followed up on these residents' concerns. They asked, what can we do? Can we do a no masking ordinance? Can we force them to stop this? And they were told, no, these are the federal authorities. They come in and this is their protocol.
Hannah, I guess my question is, is this legal? Like these masked agents coming in with plain clothes in unmarked vehicles?
Well, there's the legality and then there's the optics, right? So on the legality part, of course, the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees ICE and other immigration authorities, they argue that it is legal. Homeland Security defends this practice, and they push back on any characterization of a secret police force or a shadowy police force. And they say, look, the masking is necessary because we've seen a sharp rise in attacks on our agents and facilities. And there have been some well-documented attacks.
Stop trying to fight this president and this administration on every turn and restore law and order. That's all that we and these brave men and women of ICE are trying to do.
But the people who are studying, the broader pictures, the issue of police and public trust and law enforcement, they see something very different happening. And whatever the courts decide, and the legality is being hashed out in the courts as California and other places push back and they are trying to set some parameters through the courts. While that legal part is playing out, we are still left with the optics. And so people who study democratic backsliding toward authoritarianism, people who study security forces in repressive states, they say this is a dangerous move toward authoritarianism, and this is the kind of thing we just don't have in the United States traditionally. They see the advent of what they have called an unaccountable and unfettered national police force that operates in near total anonymity on the orders of the president. And to a lot of people, that crosses a bright red line in the United States.
I'm just curious, though, is it unprecedented? Again, for me, it seems very new. For other people that I've talked to that cover immigration, it seems very new. But is this sort of an unprecedented thing in the United States?
Well, there was one federal judge looking at these court challenges about on the legality issue, who issued a really blistering critique in his ruling. It went viral. This is a Reagan appointee to the federal bench.
That's interesting.
Yeah, Republican appointee. So, and he was just blistering in his ruling, saying this is not the United States. Masks are the domain of sort of scoundrels and the Ku Klux Klan, and that has no place in our state and our policing as we try to build public trust and accountability.
And 2 weeks ago, you saw the FBI urged ICE agents to identify themselves, after people were falsely posing as ICE and then robbing, kidnapping, or sexually assaulting people. If you can't confirm who these people are, that could really lead to all kinds of problems.
Yeah, that was a really interesting acknowledgement from the government. Basically, I think the publication Wired first published it. It was this FBI bulletin acknowledging, noting these at least 5 incidents where imposters posed as immigration agents, presumably for nefarious reasons. And so, again, it shows how this kind of policy can be exploited by bad actors. And so I thought what was really extraordinary about that bulletin was that, in public, we have Trump administration officials defending the policy of masking and saying it's necessary for all those reasons. We've got to protect our agents. But then in private, or at least in this one FBI bulletin, we do hear that there are concerns, even in the administration, about the erosion of public trust and what it means to have potential criminals going around posing as ICE and immigration agents because of the masking, essentially.
Right. And we've spoken at length about the arrest, but what happens after someone is detained? Do we see the same level of secrecy then?
It kind of depends on case by case, region to region. There's a few things going on. When someone's arrested, I mean, whether you can find them or not depends on sometimes just very basic things. Was their name entered correctly? Was there a misspelling or anything in how they were recorded? Who was the arresting agency? Sometimes if masked, unidentified authorities show up and take you off, I mean, maybe you assume it's ICE, it might not be. There are also partner agencies. So locating who even took you. And then, and then there's also, we're dealing with a huge influx of people. We are at a record high number of detainees in ICE custody, 66,000 people now sitting in ICE detention, up from, I think, 39,000 at the beginning of the year. So that's just a lot of people to keep track of.
There was a particular case that you looked into in Hays County, Texas.
Local civil rights groups are demanding some answers. They want to know what happened to nearly 50 people who were picked up in an ICE raid and where those individuals were taken.
What happened there?
This was a birthday party, a joint birthday party. Venezuelan families had rented this vacation property. And then in the early hours of the next day, there was an immigration raid, and authorities who said that they were acting on suspicion that this party was a gathering, or somehow the people there were involved in the transnational gang Tren de Aragua. And so that was the justification for this raid. They hauled off nearly 50 people, including 9 children, 9 minors.
They arrested kids at this birthday party.
They took everybody into custody, almost everyone. And it took weeks, I think even months, for everyone to be sort of tracked down. I'm not sure that everyone is actually accounted for, because people had different statuses, different, they were taken to different places. They have different attorneys. It was just sort of a logistical nightmare for immigration attorneys trying to find these folks, represent them, see that due process is playing out. And then we spoke to a local official there in Hays County 6 months after the raid, who told us he still has no idea about, where exactly everyone is. And they have no evidence of any sort of gang-related information or evidence that's been provided to them. So as he told us, as he told my colleague, David, this is the definition of a kidnapping.
Oh my gosh. They haven't even been able to prove that the people they were arresting and the kids were somehow affiliated with this gang?
Yes, that is just a case where even in some high-profile raid like this, where nearly 50 people are taken, months later, there's still not a lot of clarity on what happened or why. Why were these people targeted? And where's the evidence that shows this gang affiliation that the authorities alleged? We did ask DHS and others about that particular raid, and they didn't get back to us.
More with Hannah after the break. So, Hannah, let's talk a little bit about maybe some background here about ICE. This is an agency that's been around for over 20 years, right? And immigration advocates have criticized it from the beginning. But today, more than half of Americans disapprove of what the agency is doing and saying that it's too forceful. So how did the agency get here?
That's what we were asking these experts on policing and security forces. How did this transformation happen? And there were lots of policy decisions and changes, big and small, but we kind of narrowed it down to the 3 main issues that led to kind of the scenes we're seeing today. The first is the dismantling of oversight mechanisms, especially, the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties at Homeland Security. It's the CRCL office. Civil rights investigators would look into violations. That office is all but gone. Secondly, there was the masking that we've been talking about, these protocols. So again, if you're pushing for accountability, you have to start with who arrested me. And in some cases, they don't even know that. So it's again, a barrier to accountability and due process, according to immigration attorneys. And then the third step was really just this flooding of the zone with immigration officers. Just really just this tempo, the stepped up raids, several cities at once. And the influx, the volume has just overwhelmed what remaining oversight infrastructure there is, much less, these immigration attorneys who are now just, overwhelmed with the caseload and say that it's simply impossible and a numbers game, to make sure that due process is followed for tens of thousands of people who are being rounded up.
You need a lot of agents to detain that many people. So how has the agency grown its numbers? And, is there anything interesting about their recruitment materials?
Sure. ICE has been on a recruiting and hiring blitz, and they have the money to do it on top of the annual, I think, $10 billion operating budget. There is a new allocation of $7.5 billion a year over the next 4 years just for recruiting and retention. So in this agency's recruiting push, they have dropped educational standards. They have dropped requirements related to age and experience. And so they're really trying to get people in uniform and out on the street. And even veteran ICE agents and Homeland Security personnel, they say, this makes me really uncomfortable. We like to keep up to professional standards, and we're worried that so many new recruits with an abbreviated training period, a dismantled oversight system, this sounds like a recipe for some problems. And so even within law enforcement communities, there's concern there. Then you get to the messaging of the posters and these recruiting, memes and images. And those have come under fire. People who study white nationalist propaganda, researchers who study white power movements, they have been very concerned about the tone and the imagery in a lot of the ICE recruiting messaging. Things like protect your homeland, your heritage, and imagery of kind of an idealized version of a white American family or square-jawed white American agent out defending you. And, they say that this plays into tropes of, related to the conspiracy theory that white people are being replaced, and, all of these other sort of far-right and white nationalist propaganda, basically, that is echoed in some of these materials, according to people who study them.
So, Hannah, there's been a lot of scathing language used by officials to describe ICE. You have U.S. Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas that's compared it to, quote, slave patrols. You also have the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, calling it secret police. Now, you've actually been a foreign correspondent in the Middle East and in some countries that do actually have secret police. So I'm curious, how much water do these comparisons hold?
Well, I think it's very jarring for Americans who haven't had that, experience of living in a place where authorities can sort of roam the streets and come right up to you and say, show me your papers. I saw someone online, on a social media post saying, oh my gosh, we've become a show me your papers country. When I am reporting in authoritarian countries, I make sure, do I have my passport on me? Do I have my papers? Am I out reporting? And this is the first year that in the United States, I, an American citizen who was born here, have thought to myself, I should really make sure that I have my ID on me, especially as I go out to interview people at immigration centers or, at protests and things like that. I mean, and that is, when I realized I was doing it, it's kind of like an eerie feeling like, oh, I've felt this before, just not here.
I want to talk a little bit about, this isn't how we got here. After the murder of George Floyd in 2020, we saw a massive push toward more transparency, towards police accountability and oversight. So what does it mean that just 5 years later, masked agents can arrest people and detain them in unknown locations?
Well, I mean, already, even before, Trump came back to the White House, I mean, there were grumblings about the, what was really accomplished in 2020 with those racial justice protests all around the country, really historic uprising against police use of force and the police killing of unarmed Black people. And as a result, there was more attention. There were these consent decrees issued in the Biden era. That's where the Justice Department can sort of monitor a police department or an agency that has been accused of systematic civil rights violations. And so they launched those kinds of investigations and set benchmarks for improvement. Well, even before the immigration raid started, or I suppose at the same time, when President Trump came back to the White House, in May, they ended most of those consent decree relationships. And so already you had this sort of move away from addressing those civil rights violations and the deprioritizing of the civil rights question. And then on top of that, you add this police force, essentially, that's going around, legions of masked agents rolling around cities in unmarked cars, taking people off the street. And so, yes, I think for a lot of activists, a lot of observers of policing and law enforcement, this feels like a very dangerous backslide.
Do you see any resistance to the trend that's currently happening?
Well, I mean, activists are certainly organizing neighborhood watches, essentially. Neighborhood watches used to be, when you called the police because you saw criminal activity. Now we're seeing neighborhood watches forming to alert residents of law enforcement, specifically these immigration agents coming into an area. So there's apps that, alert to the presence of ICE agents. There are court challenges to this. We are going to be covering the court cases, the organizing, the local mobilizations, the things like the No Kings protests that happened, where I was out in the crowds that day, and I saw many, many signs held up by ordinary people there with their families saying, no secret police, no Stasi, no Gestapo. I mean, that's the kind of comparisons that ordinary Americans were making as they see these scenes and felt moved to take to the streets in these mass protests to say, this is not the America I know, and it's not one that I want to live in.